Thank you for joining us in This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Tursan. Tonight, UN Climate Summit COP26 is on and is missing one key attendee on the Turkish side. Medyascope's very own Doğu Eroğlu will be reporting live from the event. Biden and Erdoğan have that much anticipated sidelines meeting at G20 and the inflation numbers are in. The main story tonight is the 26th Annual United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26. 25,000 delegates from 220 nations have gathered in Glasgow, Scotland, to once again attempt to set near-future goals to combat climate change. Unfortunately, as the planet's temperature rises, nations are still cold to taking serious action. With, as of the airing of the show, no major coal-producing nation has pledged to sign the memorandum eliminating coal as a fuel for electricity generation by 2030. As COP26 moves forward, the Turkish booth in the conference is oddly quiet, as not many executive-level representatives have shown up. Though many presidents and prime ministers made a showing at the international summit, President Erdoğan was sorely missed. We'll have Medyascope's reporter Doğu Eroğlu reporting from the scene, but before then, let's take a look at that story.
Your Excellencies, delegates.
The 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, is underway this week, hosting heads of state from every major nation around the world. Though the summit was skipped last year due to the pandemic, it's back full force this year with 25,000 delegates from 200 countries in attendance. COP26 sets ambitious goals for developed nations, such as phasing out coal for power production by 2030, and by 2040 for developing nations, curtailing deforestation, switching to electric vehicles, and encouraging investment in renewable technologies. To attain these lofty goals, the UN seeks to obtain $100 billion in financing by the end of 2020 and is seeking both public and private funding, calling international institutions to the plate. Not everyone was in jovial spirits on the outlook of financing, however. Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, an island nation severely vulnerable to climate change, had hard criticisms.
The pandemic has taught us that national solutions to global problems do not work. We come to Glasgow with global ambition to save our people and to save our planet. But we now find three gaps. On mitigation, climate pledges or NDCs. Without more, we will leave the world on a pathway to 2.7 degrees, and with more, we are still likely to get to 2 degrees. These commitments, made by some, are based on technologies yet to be developed. And this is at best reckless and at worst dangerous. On finance, we are $20 billion short of the $100 billion. And this commitment, even then, might only be met in 2023.
One head of state was missing from the crowds, however, as President Erdoğan was not in attendance. However, while the president is absent, Mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, is expected to attend next week.
Joining me now from COP26 in Glasgow, UK, Medyascope's very own Doğu Eroğlu. Doğu, how's Glasgow treating you over there?
Well, I lived in Ankara for 15 years, so the cold is not the huge problem. But there are some issues with the Glasgow and the UK as a host to COP26. And I think inclusiveness-wise, the economic conditions for the people who's coming from the third world or even Turkey is a critical issue. As you know, UK and Scotland in particular are very expensive. Accommodations and flying over here and day-to-day living in here is very expensive. And there are huge discussions in the summit that selecting Scotland and Glasgow as a host to COP26 was some sort of a joke to, the poor side of the world.
I see. So it's rather apropos that, we're trying to save the world with the summit, but everything's so unattainable and so expensive, perhaps a little poetic here. Now, though you...
Yeah, but I should add that I think the summit administration knows about that, and that's why they decided the next summit will be held in Egypt.
All right. Well, it's a little warmer than Glasgow, I take it. Well, then let's get into it.
Definitely cheaper.
I would hope so. Yes, indeed. And, the pyramids are also very nice. Now, Doğu, let's get into it. You've been at COP26 all week. Can you give us a little brief as to what's been happening there?
Well, I should start from the day one. The first day, the opening ceremony of the COP26, there were a lot of words of promise to mitigate the carbon emissions, to put the world on the right track to net zero targets. But I should say that well, there was in the air there was some sort of the skepticism, and everybody's got used to hearing those words from politicians and UN folks. But after the second and third day, there were some positive developments. Though I should say today the tide has turned again, and I think I can summarize that there are some upsides and downsides. There are some good developments, but there are some shortcomings as well. I should start by summarizing the 5 pillars of COP26. The COP26 leadership wants to leave a legacy based on those 5 pillars. The first being methane emissions. Well, the U.S. party, especially U.S. and its supporters, wants the world to recognize the methane emissions, and they proposed a huge plan to mitigate those emissions by 30% by the year 2030. That was a very good development. And as a second pillar, there was the deforestation. As you know, the deforestation is very critical to the climate crisis, as the forest areas are natural habitats that keep man-made, human-made carbon emissions trapped under the blanket, under their own organisms. So deforestation was very critical, and a lot of nations, including Turkey, 114 nations, as far as I know, has signed the treaty, and those nations agreed that by year 2030, they wouldn't let any project, any infrastructure projects, any energy projects, any mining projects that will cause major deforestation. And the mechanisms of this treaty will be announced in the future, but there's a willingness to protect the forests for at least this goal is shared by at least 114 parties. And the other issue was the electric cars. Electric car revolution is already happening, but this has a lot to do with the country's energy portfolios. Electric cars are very useful, and they took off a lot of emissions due to fossil fuels that have been ignited, that have been used in motor vehicles, especially on the cars and lorries and trucks. So turning this tide down is a critical point for the COP26. But as I said, this has a lot to do with the renewable energies. If the nations manage to make this revolution and make a significant amount of their transportation electric, there's still question where does this electric is coming from. So electric cars revolution is a good idea. It's already happening, but the nations has to change their source of electricity as well at this stage. Also, there's another pillar. I'm very close to finishing this summary. There's another pillar. It's of course coal. Coal is the major obstacle that the climate crisis is trying to prevent. And now, as of today, today was the Energy Day at COP26. There was an expectation that a lot of nations would pledge their phasing out calendars, which means the calendars which show the nations how do they plan to stop producing electricity out of coal, and how do they plan to stop using coal as a heat source, as an energy source. And out of 190 signatories to today's decree, there are only several new nations, so that's a source of disappointment, I can say. And the remaining issues always go back to the finance, the fifth pillar of COP26. The finance day was yesterday, and there were a lot of discussions. The public funds are been trying to be raised since 2009, and not the amount that was promised to be given to the underdeveloped countries was not met in the previous years. 2020 and 2021 are not exceptions. There was a target of $100 billion fund to be deployed to underdeveloped world so that they can make the necessary transitions into their economies so that they can stop their emission-creating activities. But this year, the target has not been met, and the COP26 president said that they only expect this public fund to be complete by 2023. So there's a huge need for private funds as well. There were some initiatives at the COP26 that private funds to be mobilized, but so far most of the efforts are either controversial or there are some shortcomings in the private sector. The private sector wants to look green and still support projects that emit a lot of carbon emissions, but they just want to change the names of the funds provided. So there's a huge greenwashing problem in this area, and the private sector is not on the same boat yet.
I see. And I was going to make an addition, though. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off back there. The industry and power production are the largest contributors to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, to my knowledge. Very good. And though, now, the climate summits are not a new thing. They've been taking place since 1995. What I wanted to ask you, is there anything different about this one?
Well, this one was critical for two things. The first being the coronavirus pandemic, because the last summit, which was planning to be take place last year, was not held due to the pandemic conditions. So there was a 2 years gap, and during this 2 years gap, the world experienced a lot of climate crisis related climate events, a lot of wildfires, a lot of floods everywhere in Europe, in the US, heat waves in the US, and also cold waves in the US, and even Turkey, as a part of the Mediterranean region. Turkey had suffered from climate events in the past, but this summer was terrible, and Turkey was very helpless during the streak of wildfires, and every country had its fair share of those climate events. But also, there's a technicality for the importance of this COP summit, because it has been 5 years now that the Paris Agreement came into force. And while it was coming into force, the countries had given pledges, which is technical, with the technical terms, NDCs. And the countries said that they were gonna cut down their emissions by particular amounts 5 years ago. Now it is time for those signatory parties to renew their pledges, and while renewing them, they're expected to exceed the expectations so that the fight against the combat against climate change could become a successful one. Countries are expected to give United Nations better numbers than they gave 5 years ago, so that this climate crisis could be stopped somewhere.
I see. And let's segue into the politics of the matter a little bit now. I think the big story tonight is that a who's who of world leaders have turned up for COP26, but there is one missing. Now, as we reported earlier, President Erdoğan has not attended the COP26. Can you tell us a little bit about why?
Well, all the major nations were represented here at president levels, but as you said, President Erdoğan's presence was missed and it was noticed. And I think from what I've been hearing from COP26 folks, most people believe that he had what he wanted at the G20 summit, which was held in Rome, so that he didn't wanted to come here at all. And they gave out, the presidency gave out the sort of absurd claim that their security demands were not met by their Scottish counterparts. But well, I've seen the streets. I've seen how the world leaders come in and come out of the venues, and nobody had any complaints as far as we know. And the Glasgow police and the Glasgow folks had over 120 world leaders here at the same time. So I think Erdoğan might have slipped in.
I see. Yeah, it's kind of a tall order to say that, oh, yes, all of the world leaders are showing, but our security is rather relaxed. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I think we'll go with the first one. Perhaps he wanted to save some greenhouse emissions, but by not flying. Good for him. Moving on now. And who's representing us over there at COP26? If the president is not there, are there any decision makers in the crowd?
Well, the climate change issue is, well, most of the time, Turkey delegates this homework to its own environmental ministry. So, not surprisingly, the highest Turkish bureaucrat here is the deputy prime minister to the environmental ministry, and he's also the chief negotiator for Turkey, which means that he's entitled to make negotiations with the UN FCC board when it comes to pledging carbon emission cuts. So he's the highest authority here, and also there are some panel discussions held in Turkish pavilion here, and most of the attendances, most of the speakers are coming from different ministries, but I should rather say they're mid-level experts. Most of them are mid-level experts, not huge figures here when it comes to the bureaucracy. But I should underline it, the NGOs are much more active in Turkey's panel discussion series. And today was the Energy Day, as I told you, and there were publication of 2 reports which gave Turkey hints how to plan its way to net zero emissions by 2050.
I see. And now, since we're on the subject of energy, let's end on this one. Another big story, I think, is about the coal. Now, there have been, as you said, discussions on ending coal as a fuel source, but Turkey is the 12th largest coal supplier in the world. And I don't believe that we've signed that memorandum. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Well, that's today's development, and yeah, that's the source of the disappointment at COP26 today. Major players were invited to discuss this pledge, and none of them signed this treaty as far as now. Well, major players, who do I mean? U.S., China, Russia, India, or Australia, even Turkey. Those are the huge coal players in the world market in terms of producing it, in terms of using coal as a source of electricity, and none of them put their signatures into this treaty today. So that was a real disappointment for COP26. But it's not over yet. There's still a week for COP26 to be ended. So large pledges, large coal phasing out plans could be announced until the end of next week.
Well, let's hope that nation's love affair with coal eventually comes to an end and we see some signatures on those treaties. Doğu Eroğlu, reporting from COP26 in Glasgow. Thanks, Doğu. Stay dry out there. Moving on to the G20 summit, as were all summits today. President Erdoğan may not have shown for the COP26, but he sure did make an appearance at G20. But really, the question on everybody's mind was Erdoğan's sideline meeting with Biden. Coming off the heels of Turkey's demand for brand new F-16 fighters instead of the F-35s, many were waiting for the meeting with bated breath. While President Erdoğan evaluated the meeting as positive, the House renews its call for the Biden administration to block the sale of the F-16s. Let's go to that story now.
President Erdoğan and President Biden met last Sunday on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Rome, Italy. The meeting was the second between the two leaders since Biden took office last January. The leaders, who had previously met briefly in Brussels in June, had been expected to meet at the United Nations General Assembly in New York in September. This meeting, however, did not come to fruition amidst rocky diplomatic relations, with President Erdoğan quoted at the time saying, "I cannot say we've had a good start." The diplomatic circumstances could hardly be described as better this time. Turkey averted possibly its worst-ever diplomatic fallout with the West last week after the Turkish Foreign Ministry walked back on President Erdoğan's request that the ambassadors from 10 Western nations be declared persona non grata and deported for demanding the release of Turkish businessman and philanthropist Osman Kavala. At Sunday's meeting in Rome, topics such as Afghanistan, NATO, and Turkey's potential purchase of the F-16 fighter jets were expected to take center stage. President Biden reportedly expressed gratitude for Turkey's long-term involvement in Afghanistan, in particular the management of the Kabul airport, which concluded at the beginning of September following the Taliban's takeover of the capital. Both sides released generic, albeit upbeat messages after the meeting on Sunday. President Erdoğan's communications office announced on social media that the meeting had been held in a positive atmosphere and had addressed bilateral relations and regional issues. The White House released a short statement stating that Biden had stressed Turkey's importance as a NATO ally and arbiter in Syrian and Libyan conflicts, while again voicing concerns over Ankara's acquisition of the Russian S-400 missile systems.
In domestic news, the inflation numbers are in, and they have caused quite a stir. The Turkish Statistical Institute is reporting that monthly inflation rates have only increased by 2.5% since last month's numbers, which many are greeting with skepticism and a grain of salt. Folks all over the country are feeling the squeeze, particularly with food, clothing, and transportation prices. Last month's big story in the economy was the historic hit to natural gas and fuel costs, with the lira taking yet another nosedive. President Erdoğan's unorthodox economic policies of reducing interest rates at the expense of the lira's value do not seem to have taken effect, and the inflation appears to be on the rise yet again.
The Turkish Statistical Institute reports that in October of 2021, consumer prices rose by 2.39% monthly and 19.89% annually. In addition, food prices increased by 1.92% monthly and 27.41% annually. In October 2021, Producer Price Index rose by 5.24% monthly and 46.31% annually, while core inflation increased by 1.79% monthly and 16.32% annually. In October, the prices of 46 items out of 415 in the inflation basket decreased. Prices of 38 items remained unchanged, while the prices of 331 items increased. Back in September of 2021, annual consumer price inflation had increased by 19.58%. Annual food price inflation was up by 28.79%. Annual Producer Price Index had risen by 43.96%. And core inflation had increased by 16.98%. The highest annual increase in Consumer Price Index was seen in food and non-alcoholic beverages, going up by 27.41%, restaurants and hotels at 25.23%, and household goods at 23.03%. The highest monthly increase was seen in clothing and shoes at 7.56%, alcoholic beverages and tobacco at 5.97%, and transportation at 2.43%. Breaking down the Producer Price Index, annual inflation in four main sectors of the industry are 53.37% in electricity and gas production and distribution, 45.94% in manufacturing, 32.40% in water supply, and 32.25% in mining and quarries.
That's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have Murat, Tursan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope, 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.